This Otis training video was designed to teach you how to deliver a check-in, check-out intervention. Before watching this, it is recommended that Tier 1 positive behavioral supports be established before considering Cico. PBIS expectations can be used as the goals in Cico. Resources are more effectively allocated to Cico when an identified Tier 1 support system is already in place. However, even if PBIS is not in place, Cico can be a useful intervention. Additionally, you should decide what data collection strategies will be used for both Tier 1 and Tier 2. Check-in, check-out, or Cico, is a school-wide prevention program for students who engage in problem behavior who would benefit from more positive adult attention and structured feedback to be successful in schools. The goal of Cico is to provide more intense instruction and feedback to students on their behavior, as well as increase and shape the use of positive, pro-social behaviors in school. Cico is anchored in positive supports and reinforcement, praise, and feedback, which are used to help students learn school-friendly behaviors. Cico is about teaching students good behavior and giving them an appropriate time and space to get the adult attention they need. Cico is designed for students whose problem behaviors are unresponsive to Tier 1 practices and systems and do not require more immediate, individualized interventions, but where problems are observed across multiple settings or contexts. Cico includes increased positive adult contact, a direct link to school-wide behavioral goals and expectations, frequent feedback, daily homeschool communication, and positive reinforcement contingent on meeting behavioral goals. Research on Cico and similar programs have demonstrated decreases in problem behaviors, office discipline referrals, and referrals for special education services. We will begin by addressing some frequently asked questions about Cico. 1. Is Check-in, Check-out similar to the Behavior Education Program or Check-in Connect? Cico and the Behavior Education Program are identical in most areas. Do not be confused if you see these terms used interchangeably in the literature. Check-in Connect is similar to Cico, however it is tailored for older students. Check-in Connect has a more developed mentoring component that is age appropriate for adolescents. Oftentimes, schools that use Check-in Connect hire a counselor whose job is specifically to implement this program. Those interested in Check-in Connect should seek out literature specifically on that intervention, although many of the basics will also be covered here. 2. What students do well with Cico? Cico is a specialized intervention and it may not be appropriate for everyone. Good candidates for Cico are those students who have behavioral concerns and/or who are starting to act out but are not currently engaging in dangerous behavior, such as extreme aggression or property destruction, or severely disruptive behavior like extreme noncompliance or defiance. Students who have problem behaviors across the day and in different settings are good candidates for the program versus students who have trouble only at recess or during math. Such problems may be better suited for tailored consultation with individual teachers. Note that Cico is most appropriate for students with attention-seeking behavior, although can be adjusted to handle other student problems. Cico is one option for targeted intervention, but you should accurately assess for whom it will work. How do we nominate a student for Cico? Procedures should be established in order to select students for Cico. The most common nomination procedures involves using cut scores based on the number of office discipline referrals. For example, after a student's third referral, they may be considered good candidates for Cico. You may also choose to select students based on parental request or request from teachers who have demonstrated the students need a targeted intervention. Your process for nomination should be explicit and written out to avoid confusion. When should students cease Cico and return to Tier 1? Students do not stay in Cico forever. Cico data should be monitored weekly and criteria should be established prior to implementation to determine when a student will be removed from Cico. For example, if the student has 5 data points above a pre-established goal line, he or she may exit from the Cico program. Similarly, there should be criteria for students who are not making adequate progress, such as 5 consecutive data points below the goal line, or 3 consecutive days of decreasing points. These students may qualify for a Tier 3 intervention that is of higher intensity and more individualized. In addition, students do not begin Cico with the maximum goal for appropriate behavior. They should work their way up so that they continue to be reinforced 80% of the time and the benchmark increases until the ultimate goal is reached. In other words, start students off with a modest goal and increase that goal as student behavior improves. Here is an example of how the data can be used in Cico Swiss. To conduct the Cico intervention, you will need the Cico point cards. The Cico point card is based on school-wide expectations. For each expectation, a number from a scale of 0 to 2 is assigned to the child each class period or activity. A 2 means a student perfectly met the expectation. A 1 means a student had some difficulty but overall met the expectation. And a 0 means a student did not meet the expectation during that instructional period. On the left-hand side of the card are the school expectations, which are positive and general enough to be applicable to any setting in the school. The Cico point card can also be modified to be developmentally appropriate for younger students, such as on this smiley face point card. All students, young and old, should be appropriately instructed what types of behaviors constitute a 0, 1, or 2. For example, consistently poking another student with a pencil when the teacher has instructed students to work at their desk would be considered a 0. However, a student that was given a warning for doing so and promptly complied would be exhibiting behavior for a ranking of 1. And a student who followed instructions the first time and worked quietly at his or her desk would receive a 2. Other materials you will need include a pencil, clipboard, and rewards. If your school is already using positive behavioral supports and has an acknowledgement system, this should be extended to students in the Cico intervention. If you are not already utilizing PBIS, here are a few examples of rewards that are cost-efficient and potentially effective for use with the Cico program. Next, we will review the procedures for Cico. But first, let's review the personnel needed to successfully implement Cico. The referred student is, of course, the first of the Cico personnel. He or she carries the Cico point card to every class, is responsible for monitoring his or her behavior according to the expectations listed on the card, and then prompts the teacher or staff to provide feedback on the student's behavior. The Cico coordinator is the main point of contact for the participating student. The coordinator can be a homeroom teacher or a staff member that will be available to greet the student in the morning, collect point cards, and provide feedback to the student at the end of the day. The data management specialist is responsible for collecting the point cards and inputting the information into your data management system weekly in order to allow for efficient decision making. Each classroom teacher that the student interacts with each day should be filling out the point card and providing feedback to the student on his or her behavior. Parents also serve as Cico personnel, reviewing the Cico point card at the end of the day and providing ample reinforcement to the student. It should be noted that all personnel should be trained in the steps of Cico prior to implementation in order to ensure procedural fidelity. In the beginning stages of implementation, the Cico coordinator should take about 15 minutes to orient the student to Cico by showing him how it is done and provide instruction on accepting corrective feedback about behavior. The coordinator demonstrates examples and non-examples of following school rules and accepting feedback and allows the student to practice. 1. Student checks in with the Cico coordinator in the morning. Each day, the student will check in with the identified Cico coordinator, such as the homeroom teacher, in the designated location. The Cico coordinator should enthusiastically greet the student, collect the point card from the previous day, and give the student a new point card, assigning points as necessary, and ensure that the student has his or her materials for the day. 2. Student carries a point card based on school-wide expectations. Each adult should ensure that the student has his or her Cico sheet. Extra should be available on hand in order to continue with the Cico program with minimal interruption. The student should check in with each teacher or staff, who should pre-teach the expectation and cue appropriate behavior for the student. The point card also serves to prompt appropriate behaviors. 3. Student receives frequent and regular feedback on behavior from adults throughout the day. At the end of each period or activity, the student checks out with the teacher or staff in charge, who circles the points earned by the student and provides brief, descriptive, positive feedback. If the student does not earn full points, the adult should include a brief, descriptive, corrective statement describing why the student didn't earn the points. The adult should be careful not to use negative wording or sarcasm if the student does not receive full points, and should not penalize the student for behavior from a previous period or activity. All raters will need a brief training prior to Cico implementation to ensure that they all rate similarly. 4. Student reviews goals with the coordinator at the end of the day. At the end of the day, the student will check out with the coordinator, who will give positive feedback, calculate the points earned for that day, and sign the point card. The student may also receive a reward if the goal is reached for that day based on the percentage of points. This daily interaction provides the student with positive adult attention in a friendly, positive setting that may prevent future behavior problems. Here is an example of a completed point card. A baseline should be taken of the student's current behavior in order to establish a good starting point, where he or she is capable of receiving reinforcement at least 80% of the time. For example, if the student normally meets behavioral expectations 45% of the time, a reasonable goal to begin with would be 50. Once the goal is met for 5 consecutive days, the goal can be increased by 10%. 5. Student takes the point card home for parent signature and positive feedback. Parents should be reminded that Cico is intended to be positive for their child. When the child's goal is met, parents should be instructed to give praise, such as, "Wow, you did a great job following all the rules today." When the child does not meet the goal, parents should be trained to use encouraging words and refrain from punishing or being negative toward the child. Remember, a primary goal of Cico is to teach positive behavior, not necessarily to only punish negative behavior. 6. Student brings the point card back to school the next day. The Cico coordinator is responsible for collecting point cards from the previous day and assigning points based on whether the child did not return the point card, returned it without a signature, or brought it with a signature. When the student returns a signed point card to the Cico coordinator, he should receive ample praise, and bucks or coupons if applicable for doing so. Up next is an example of a student completing the Cico steps with the Cico coordinator and various adults throughout the day.
Good morning, Brock. Do you have your points card with you today?
Good morning. Yes, I have it right here.
Thank you. Wow, Brock, you did an excellent job today. Following directions, starting your work immediately, and using kind words today. Great job. You got all 2s today.
Thank you, Mr. Anna.
You're welcome. Here you go.
Hi, Brock. Do you have your points card today?
Hi, Mr. Simons. Yes, I have it right here.
Thank you. You did a good job using kind words and working hard today, and you received 2s for both of those. Now, you received a 1 for following directions because I had to remind you 3 times to put your materials away. But you can earn a 2 tomorrow if you follow directions the first time. Okay?
I'll try to follow the directions the first time tomorrow.
Hello again, Brock. Let's look at your point card for today. Wow, you earned 35 out of 42 points today. Great job. Now that I've signed your point card, don't forget to get it signed by your parents tonight and bring it back tomorrow. Have a great day.
The next day, when the student returns with the previous day's Cico point card, signed by the parent, he or she should be reinforced appropriately, and the point card should be stored in the designated location where it will later be collected by the data management specialist. This person then inputs the information from the card into the data collection system. The School-Wide Information System, or SWIS, is a good example of a data collection system. SWIS is an internet-based information system that is designed to collect, summarize, and assist school personnel in the decision-making process using student discipline data. Discipline data can be used to decide which students need greater support using interventions like Cico. With SWIS, referrals can be organized graphically by month, day, time, location, or problem behavior. Cico SWIS is an application that is part of the SWIS suite that allows school personnel to manage data for students participating in the Cico intervention. Cico SWIS can track student goals and daily progress, and students can be ported from SWIS. For more information about SWIS and Cico SWIS, please contact your Otis coach. Cico is a highly efficient, evidence-based intervention for students with behavioral difficulties. Cico may not work for everyone. It is one example of a targeted intervention that is most effective for attention-seeking students, so it is important to assess for whom Cico will work. Before beginning Cico, PBIS should already be in place, but even in the absence of tiered behavioral support, Cico can be effective. For optimal results, involve all faculty in Cico. Be sure to identify and use a data tracking system in order to decide when to cease Cico and monitor the fidelity of the intervention. Thank you for your time and effort.